Welcome to Galactic Conundrums, where the secrets of the universe are more than just cosmic riddles. They are mysteries that can change the very fabric of reality. In the far reaches of the galaxy, where power and fear have ruled for centuries, one empire stands unchallenged, the Zeith Dominion, commanded by the formidable Supreme Warlord, Thyra. But when a single human, Kael Mercer, is captured and brought aboard her massive warship, the Doombringer, everything begins to change. As Kael mocks and defies Thyra's iron grip, his words challenge everything she has ever believed. For the first time in her reign, doubt begins to creep into the heart of the once unstoppable warlord. With every word, Kael forces Thyra to confront the foundation of her empire, a foundation built on fear and control. In this gripping journey, witness a powerful shift in the galaxy's balance as Kael's defiance begins to unravel Thyra's unyielding rule. From the shattered remains of the planet Tarvis Prime to the dark corridors of the Doombringer, a rebellion stirs, not of weapons, but of thought and uncertainty. Will Thyra remain the ruthless conqueror she's always been, or will Kael's unrelenting challenge inspire a change that could shake the galaxy to its core? The world of Tarvis Prime lies in silence, a once thriving planet now reduced to a smoldering wasteland. The air is thick with the acrid scent of burnt ozone and the remnants of ionized metal. Above, the sun hangs low, its dim light a haunting red, casting long shadows across the broken cityscape. The sky, once a bright azure, is now marred by dark clouds of ash swirling in the wind, remnants of the orbital bombardment that ravaged the land. In the midst of this destruction stands Thyra, the Supreme Warlord of the Zeith Dominion, her obsidian black armor gleaming faintly in the dying light. She surveys the desolation before her, twisted metal, shattered buildings, and the hollowed-out remains of what were once grand structures. Her piercing eyes, glowing with the fire of conquest, sweep over the landscape as she feels the weight of her power. At her feet, a group of prisoners kneels, shackled and broken. Their bodies tremble with fear, their heads bowed in submission. The remnants of their once proud civilization lie scattered around them, crushed under the might of Thyra's rule. But there is one who does not cower, one who stands defiant amid the ruins. A human. Kael Mercer, his flight jacket tattered and smeared with soot, stands among the captives, his posture relaxed as if the weight of the world had no claim over him. His face, though marked by dirt and the horrors of war, remains unfazed, an unreadable calm etched into his features. His hands, stuffed into his jacket pockets, do not tremble. He doesn't kneel. He doesn't flinch. Thyra's crimson eyes narrow, intrigued. She had seen countless species cower before her, civilizations crumble under her might. Fear was always the final outcome. It was the universal truth of her reign. And yet, before her, this human remains unmoved. This was unfamiliar. With a deliberate step forward, her boots clicking against the scorched ground, Thyra approaches the human. The prisoners around her stiffen, their fear palpable, their breaths shallow. A towering warlord flanks her, his stance rigid, ready for Thyra's command. But Thyra does not speak. Her gaze remains fixed on the human, and she stops just in front of him, her towering form casting a shadow over him. She speaks then, her voice cold and sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Thyra, why aren't you afraid, human?" The words hang in the air, vibrating with the power of her voice, carrying the weight of countless victories. It is not a question she asks often. No, fear was a given. It was a tool, a weapon she had wielded with deadly precision. But now, before her, this human, this anomaly, challenges everything she knows. Kael tilts his head slightly, as if considering her words. He glances around at the crumbling city, then back at her. A faint smirk tugs at the corner of his lips, a glimmer of amusement dancing in his eyes, despite the ruin surrounding them. Kael Mercer, with a shrug, "Well, for one, I've had worse Mondays." There is a brief, stunned silence that follows. The prisoners glance at each other nervously, unsure how to react. One of the warlords, a massive brute covered in jagged cybernetic armor, growls low in his throat, stepping forward. "Warlord, he mocks you, Supreme One. Shall I tear him apart?" Kael raises a hand, his voice light, almost casual, as he speaks to the warlord, but his eyes never leave Thyra's. Kael Mercer, grinning, Whoa. Let's not be hasty here, big guy. You look like you work out, and I've got exactly zero interest in becoming a smear on your resume." Thyra's eye twitches in irritation, but it's not anger that stirs within her. No, it's something far more unsettling. Something she hasn't felt in eons: curiosity. She steps closer to Kael, the energy around her crackling in the air, violet light dancing along the edges of her gauntlet. It is not a warning. No, it is a reflex. A reflex born of centuries of unchallenged rule. "Thyra," in a deadly whisper, "what is your name, human?" Kael looks at her, his gaze casual, almost playful. His voice is steady, unfazed. "Kael Mercer, Kael Mercer. Pleasure to meet you." A beat of silence. "Thyra," her voice cold, yet with a hint of intrigue, "you are either the bravest or the most foolish creature I have ever encountered, Kael Mercer." Kael smirks, his confidence unwavering. Kael Mercer, grinning, "Why not both?" The massive warship looms before Kael, its dark hull glinting with the eerie light of distant stars. The Doombringer, a vessel as terrifying as its name suggests, floats silently in the void, a behemoth of metal and death. Its sleek, jagged edges seem to tear through the very fabric of space, as if daring any force to challenge its dominance. The ship is vast, nearly 20 kilometers in length, and its surface is lined with weapons that hum with a silent, menacing energy. As Kael is escorted through the corridors of the ship, he feels the weight of its oppressive design. The walls are a cold, unforgiving black, adorned with veins of crimson light that pulse rhythmically, as if the ship itself has a heartbeat. The floors are polished obsidian, reflecting every step in sharp clarity. Each turn, Each door he passes seems to lead deeper into a labyrinth of shadows and mechanical hums. The air inside the ship smells sterile metallic, almost clinical, like a place built for only one purpose: destruction. The faint scent of ozone lingers, as if the ship is constantly charged with a thread of violent energy, ready to unleash at any moment. Despite the imposing atmosphere, Kael strides forward without hesitation. His hands are bound by the high-tech restraints, advanced alien technology designed to suppress any attempt at escape. The glowing cuffs hum faintly with a soft, electric pulse, yet Kael remains unfazed. His casual movements contrast starkly with the grim surroundings. He glances around, his eyes scanning the cold, empty halls with bemusement. Kael Mercer, mocking. "Well, I gotta say, you guys really know how to build an intimidating spaceship. You should consider opening a tour business. Only, maybe add a few plants? Some greenery would do wonders in here. Maybe a little jazz music, to really set the mood." The guards, towering and silent, stare straight ahead, their expressions unreadable behind their helmets. Kael doesn't flinch at their presence. He continues his walk, his voice dripping with irreverence. Kael Mercer, casually. "I mean, come on, guys. This place is all sharp corners and gloom. It's like someone took all the worst parts of an evil overlord's dream and put them together. You guys ever think of adding a few safety railings? I mean, just saying, this place could really use some feng shui." He passes a series of observation windows, looking out into the abyss of space. The view is breathtaking, an endless sea of stars, galaxies swirling in the distance, but to Kael, it's just another day in the universe. His gaze flicks back to the walls, a smirk tugging at his lips. The ship's grandeur is undeniable, its power, its presence, are as immense as they are terrifying. But Kael's attitude remains unchanged. He walks like a man in his own home, unfazed by the monumental war machine surrounding him. The warlords accompanying him stiffen at his words, but not one of them speaks. They are trained to show no emotion, to follow orders without question. Kael, however, has no such restraint. As they approach the central chamber, the heart of the Doombringer, the air grows heavier, thick with the hum of machinery. The grand chamber opens before them, an enormous hall, with walls that seem to stretch on forever. The floor is made of dark stone, polished to a mirror-like sheen, reflecting the harsh lights above. The ceiling is lost in shadow, an endless expanse that makes the room feel even larger. In the center, a control platform rises, surrounded by consoles and monitors that flicker with alien symbols and data. The atmosphere is cold, clinical, a place where the fate of entire worlds could be decided with a push of a button. It radiates the kind of power that makes most beings cower in fear. But not Kael. He takes it all in with a chuckle, his eyes sweeping over the grand, oppressive design. He leans against one of the consoles, his restraints barely noticeable in his relaxed stance. Kael Mercer, grinning. "You know, with all this tech, I thought you guys might have figured out how to make a room with a little more personality. I mean, come on, this place is just one long, dark hallway with some flashing lights. How do you guys stand it? Don't you ever get bored of looking at, well, this? The warlords around him are stiff, their posture rigid. They are waiting for a reaction, perhaps hoping for him to show fear or regret. But Kael only continues to mock them, his voice light, his demeanor unbroken. Kael Mercer, playfully. I gotta hand it to you, though. You've really nailed the whole evil overlord aesthetic. I mean, dark, brooding halls, a ship that could level a planet. It's like you guys got the memo from the How to Rule the Universe handbook. I'm just surprised there's not a giant chair for you to sit in and stroke a cat or something. His words hang in the air, and for a moment, the silence is thick except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. The tension, however, doesn't seem to reach Kael. To him, this is just another adventure, another ship filled with threats he's learned to ignore. But as he looks at the towering, imposing structure around him, he can't help but feel that even here, in the belly of this terrifying warship, there's something deeper. Something darker. The more he mocks it, the more he realizes that beneath the cold, lifeless walls of the Doombringer, there's a force waiting to be unleashed, a force that may very well change everything. But for now, Kael Mercer is content to walk the halls, the unshaken human in a world built on fear. The chamber is cold, sterile, designed for one purpose, to break the spirit. The walls are smooth and dark, a polished black that absorbs the dim light from the flickering overhead panels. Shadows stretch long and deep across the floor, where a single chair stands, placed beneath an array of glowing, ominous conduits. The air is thick, laced with a hum of energy that flows through the walls, a quiet reminder of the immense power housed within this ship. Thyra stands tall, a towering figure of strength and dominance, her eyes glowing like burning coals. Her obsidian armor reflects the faint light, adding to her intimidating presence. She's a being accustomed to power, to fear. And in front of her, sitting in the stark, metallic chair, is Kael Mercer. His hands are bound, but there's no sign of discomfort in his posture. He slouches slightly, his gaze steady, his lips curved into a faint, almost amused smile. The chains that bind him hum softly, shimmering with alien energy, but Kael's calm, almost indifferent expression remains unchanged. Despite being in the heart of his captor's domain, a place where countless beings had crumbled before her, he doesn't show a hint of fear. He's not shaking, not trembling, his eyes never waver from Thyra's as if to say, "I'm not impressed." Thyra steps forward, her boots clicking sharply against the cold floor. Her gaze never leaves him, and for the first time in her life, she feels the smallest tremor of uncertainty. She expects him to beg, to plead, or at least to show some sign of submission, but he remains a mystery to her. This defiant human is an anomaly, a crack in the foundation of everything she has built. She stops just in front of him, towering over him. Her voice cuts through the stillness, like a blade through silence. Thyra, coldly. You mock me. You mock everything I have built. Why? Why do you not fear me? You know what I am capable of. You know what I can do to you. Her words hang heavy in the air, each one weighted with a threat of destruction. The room hums with the promise of power, but Kael does not flinch. His gaze flickers to the glowing conduits embedded in the ceiling, tracing their intricate patterns with a detached curiosity before meeting her eyes again. Kael Mercer, calmly, with a slight grin. You're right about one thing: you can destroy me. I know that. But the thing is, I've been to places worse than this. I've faced threats bigger than you. Fear doesn't work the way you think it does. He leans back slightly in a chair, as though he were in the middle of a casual conversation rather than facing the wrath of the most feared warlord in the galaxy. The chains around his wrists seem almost comical in their restraint against his casual defiance. Kael Mercer, continuing. Fear is just a tool. A temporary one. It works as long as you can hold it over someone. But the moment they stop being afraid, it loses all its power. And trust me, I've been there. I've seen what it's like when fear stops working. Thyra narrows her eyes. She's heard these words before countless times from rebels, from conquerors, from those who tried to challenge her. Yet, none of them had spoken with the same conviction. None had truly stopped fearing her. And yet here, before her, sits a human who doesn't seem to fear anything at all. She takes a slow step forward, the violet glow of her gauntlet flaring to life, sending a pulse of energy through the room. The conduits above her hum louder, flickering with bright bursts of light. The temperature in the room seems to drop a few degrees, the air growing heavier, more oppressive. Thyra, her voice low, dangerous. You speak of fear like it is nothing, but you do not understand its power. I have conquered worlds, crushed civilizations. Fear is the very foundation of my rule. It is what keeps everything in line. What makes the universe bow to me. And yet you sit there, untouched, unafraid. What do you think you know that I do not? Kael shifts in his seat, the glow of the restraints on his wrists reflecting off his face, making his expression appear even more relaxed and unaffected. Kael Mercer, with a faint chuckle. Maybe I don't know anything more than you, but what I do know is this: fear only works as long as you let it. It's a game. A game that you've played for too long. And in the end, you're just one more player in the cycle. One who thinks they can control everything with it. He leans forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers, a quiet challenge in his voice. Kael Mercer, seriously. But what if I told you, you don't need fear to control? What if there's another way? A better way? Thyra's fingers twitch slightly, a subtle sign that something inside her is shifting, but she quickly suppresses it. Her eyes flash with an icy resolve, but something deeper lingers beneath the surface. She's not used to being questioned like this, especially not by a human. Thyra, her voice a dangerous whisper. You speak as though you know me, human. As though you understand the weight of what I carry. Kael smiles softly, almost pitying, as if he knows something she doesn't. Kael Mercer, calmly. I understand one thing. Fear isn't forever. It doesn't last. You can control people with it, sure. But not for long. Eventually, they stop fearing you, and then, what do you have left? The room falls silent. The air feels heavier now, charged with an energy that is almost electric. Kael's words seem to have reached something deep within Thyra, a crack in her armor that she cannot ignore. She takes a step back, her posture rigid, her mind racing. The power she's relied on for centuries, could it truly be so fragile? Could it all come undone because of one defiant human who refuses to fear her? For the first time, Thyra hesitates. She had come here expecting to break him, to make him submit. But now, she feels an unfamiliar sense of uncertainty. She looks down at Kael, her crimson eyes searching for any sign of weakness. There is none. And for the first time in a long while, she wonders if maybe, just maybe, this human might be right. The cell is cold, dimly lit by a faint, pulsing red light that seems to hang in the air, casting long, shifting shadows across the barren metal walls. The air is thick with the sterile, metallic scent of the Doombringer, stale, unyielding. It feels as if the very walls themselves are alive, watching, waiting. The sounds of distant machinery hum softly in the background, a constant reminder of the ship's immense power. Yet within this room, Kael Mercer sits, completely unfazed, a stark contrast to the tension surrounding him. His hands are bound by the glowing restraints, but they do little to limit his movements. He shifts his position on the cold metal bench, his legs casually crossed, as though he were lounging in a place far more comfortable. Despite the unrelenting chill of the room, he seems perfectly at ease, his eyes scanning the walls, the ceiling, every corner of the cell with a detached curiosity. Every now and then, he lets out a low chuckle, as if finding amusement in the absurdity of his situation. The guards stationed outside the cell, towering and silent, do little to stir him. He knows they are watching, waiting for him to show some sign of fear or desperation, but he offers nothing of the sort. Kael Mercer, mockingly, to himself. You know, I've been to better prison cells. This place could really use some better lighting. Maybe a few throw rugs to soften up the place. The words drift into the silent air, barely audible, but somehow they seem to reach beyond the cell's confines. As if the walls themselves were recording his every word, the words slither out into the very heart of the Doombringer. And with each passing day, they begin to seep into the crevices of the ship's vast, cold expanse. Elsewhere on the ship, things begin to change. Officers, once unwavering in their obedience, now exchange furtive glances in the corridors. Conversations, once strictly about strategy and protocol, have begun to carry a different tone, a tone of uncertainty, of questioning. In the command room, General Kael stands with his back to the towering holographic map of the galaxy, his hands clasped behind his back. He stares intently at the flashing red dots on the map coordinates marking the progress of their ongoing conquests. But something in his posture suggests a shift in his thoughts, an unease that wasn't there before. General Kael, muttering under his breath. The human, he makes a mockery of everything. A simple prisoner, but his words, they linger. His voice trails off, his gaze flickering toward the door as if he can sense the presence of something, an unknown tension building behind him. The guards, standing watch along the walls, exchange subtle looks. A few have started to hum quietly to themselves, their once steady movements slower, almost distracted. In the lower decks, a maintenance officer, once diligent in his work, pauses. He stands before a control panel, staring at the flashing lights before him, lost in thought. A whisper escapes his lips, barely audible. Maintenance officer, softly. He's right, you know. We are nothing but tools, aren't we? Pawns in her game. The officer shakes his head as if to clear the thought, but it lingers, an unwelcome seed planted in his mind. It's small, almost imperceptible, but it is there. And in a ship like the Doombringer, where conformity and obedience are the bedrock of its strength, such a seed can grow dangerously. As Kael sits in his cell, he has no way of knowing the ripple effect his defiance has created. His casual dismissal of Thyra's power, his constant mocking of her empire, has begun to take root in the minds of those around him. The fear they had once relied on is no longer as effective. The oppressive weight of Thyra's rule, built on a foundation of terror, begins to crack as whispers spread like wildfire. In the corridors, the once imposing warlords now walk with their heads slightly lowered, their hands twitching at their sides as if eager to respond, but hesitant to do so. The once formidable atmosphere aboard the Doombringer now feels slightly less certain, less anchored. The crew begins to question, even if just for a fleeting moment, what their lives are worth under Thyra's reign. The soldiers, standing guard over Kael's cell, begin to exchange glances. They had been trained to show no emotion, to remain unmoved by anything, but now, as Kael's words echo in their minds, the wall they had built around their own beliefs begins to crack. They look at each other, unsure of how to proceed. Doubt is a dangerous thing, especially when it spreads among those who have been taught to obey without question. One guard, unable to resist, turns his head slightly toward the cell door, his gaze landing on Kael. Kael looks back, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Kael Mercer, grinning. You know, standing there all stiff and silent, I'm pretty sure that's not good for your back. I could teach you a few stretches if you're interested. The guard stiffens, but there is something about Kael's ease that unnerves him. Instead of the usual anger or outrage, the guard finds himself wondering, just for a moment, why am I standing here? Elsewhere, within the heart of the ship, Thyra remains oblivious to the growing unrest. Her mind, ever sharp and calculating, is still focused on Kael. She has watched him, analyzed him, but there's something in his defiance, something in the way he challenges her power that keeps her on edge. But her empire, the one she has spent centuries building, begins to shift around her. The cracks appear slowly, imperceptibly, like fissures in a foundation that has stood for eons. The seeds of doubt, once small and almost invisible, begin to sprout. The question now is not whether Thyra will notice them, but how much longer she can keep them from growing into something far more dangerous. The air in Thyra's private chamber is thick with tension, as though even the ship's cold, unyielding metal walls sense the shift occurring within her. The room, filled with the sharp hum of machinery, seems quieter than usual, and the faint flicker of the holographic displays in front of her adds to the oppressive stillness. Thyra stands before a massive window, gazing out into the vastness of space. The stars outside are distant, cold, and indifferent. The same coldness she feels creeping into her mind. For centuries, she has ruled with fear, with power. She has watched civilizations crumble before her, bent under the weight of her will. But now, something feels different, something has begun to unsettle her, and she cannot ignore it. She hasn't been able to focus fully on her next conquest, her next move. Her thoughts keep drifting back to him, Kael Mercer. His mocking smile, his defiance, his refusal to be broken, none of it fits with the way she's always known her power to work. She frowns, narrowing her glowing crimson eyes. She is not used to hesitation. She is used to control. Her every action, every word, has always commanded obedience. But Kael has made her question that. She slowly turns from the window, her armored boots echoing in the stillness. Her mind races, and the silent hum of the ship seems to grow louder in her ears. Her thoughts are interrupted by the sound of the door sliding open. Two warlords step inside, their postures rigid, their faces impassive. They have come to report just as they always have. Warlord, gruffly. Supreme One, the human. He still refuses to comply. His mocking continues. Thyra raises a hand, cutting the warlord off. She does not need the report. She already knows. The words, the mockery, the humor, they are working. And that thought gnaws at her. Thyra, interrupting. I know. Leave me. The warlords hesitate but then bow and exit without a word. Thyra is left alone in the quiet chamber once again, her gaze falling upon the dark holographic display floating in front of her. The images flicker with data about her empire, worlds conquered, species subdued, resistance crushed. But they feel hollow now. Something is missing. She knows she should be preparing for her next move, her next conquest, her next planet to destroy, but her mind keeps returning to Kael. She recalls his words in the interrogation room, the way he stood before her, so casually defiant. Her fingers twitch, her grip tightening on the armrest of her chair. Thyra, muttering to herself. Fear is my weapon. Fear is power. It must be. But doubt lingers. The words Kael spoke, fear is just a tool. A temporary one. Replay in her mind, like an echo that she cannot shake off. She can still hear his voice, calm and almost dismissive. What do you have left when fear no longer works? Her heart begins to race, though she doesn't acknowledge it. It's not fear she feels. No, it's something else. Something worse. Uncertainty. A force she has never known. She strides towards the door, her boots clicking against the cold metal floor, and exits the chamber. The corridors of the Doombringer stretch before her, vast and unyielding. She moves quickly, her mind focused, but her thoughts, now fractured, make it impossible to concentrate. She reaches the prison cells, where Kael is held, and the guards at the entrance part as she approaches. Inside, Kael sits as he always does, relaxed, unbothered, despite the high-tech restraints that bind him. The soft, rhythmic pulse of the restraint's energy hums in the silence. He's looking at her, and there is no trace of fear in his expression. No submission. Only that same mocking glint in his eyes, as though he's aware of the very thing gnawing at her. Kael Mercer, with a sly grin. Back again? I guess I must be doing something right. Or maybe you're just looking for a good laugh. Thyra does not answer immediately. She steps closer, her imposing figure casting a long shadow over him. But she is not here to interrogate. Her eyes narrow as she regards him, studying him carefully, as if seeing him for the first time. Something in his presence, in his defiance, has begun to chip away at the fortress she has built around herself. Thyra, her voice colder than before. You continue to mock me, to challenge me. You think your words have meaning. Kael looks up at her, his posture relaxed, the chains on his wrists still glowing faintly with energy. He shrugs, a careless gesture that further irritates her. Kael Mercer, casually. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. But what I know for sure is that you can't keep using fear forever. You can't keep pushing everyone around you with it. Eventually, they'll see it for what it really is, a crutch. Thyra clenches her fists, the gauntlets on her arms sparking with barely contained power. The room around her seems to pulse, as if it can sense her rising anger. Yet, beneath that anger, something else stirs a deeper uncertainty. Thyra, in a low voice. You think you understand fear, human? You think you know what it can do? I have built an empire on it. Entire worlds bow to it. It bends even the strongest of wills. What can you possibly know about power? Kael leans back in his chair, tilting his head slightly as though contemplating her words, but the smirk never fades from his face. Kael Mercer, softly. Power built on fear isn't power. It's control. And control, well, control has its limits. Thyra stands still, the silence stretching between them. His words hang in the air, their weight far greater than she expected. Thyra, whispering to herself. What if he's right? For the first time, doubt creeps into her thoughts, a crack in the flawless image she has maintained for centuries. She has always relied on fear. Fear of her power, fear of her empire. But now, the very thing she has used to break others seems to be slipping through her fingers, dissolving like smoke in the air. She doesn't know what to do. For the first time, the answer isn't clear. She had thought herself invincible, above questioning, but now Kael's defiance seems to have broken something inside her. For the first time in a long while, Thyra is unsure. And in her heart, she feels the stirrings of something much more dangerous than the forces she commands: uncertainty. The command deck of the Doombringer is a stark contrast to the chaos of the outer galaxy. The high-tech consoles hum steadily, their bright holographic projections flickering with streams of data. The ship, vast and unyielding, drifts in the depths of space, a silent sentinel of destruction. Before Thyra, the galaxy unfolds on the massive central display, a map of planets and systems under her iron grip. The red dots of conquered worlds pulse ominously, like the beating heart of her empire. But something stirs within her as her eyes trace the blinking lights. Her fingers hover over the controls, the sleek metal surface cool beneath her touch. A message flashes across the display: Rebellion detected, Terra C sector. The transmission flickers briefly before showing the coordinates of the uprising. A small rebellion, no more than a few hundred insurgents, had dared to challenge the might of the Doombringer. Normally, Thyra would respond with the brutal force of her fleet, swift, merciless, crushing. But this time, she hesitates. Her mind drifts, caught between the power she has always wielded and the questions that have been gnawing at her ever since Kael Mercer entered her life. The room around her seems to close in, the soft hum of the ship's engines growing louder. Her breath catches in her throat as the weight of the decision presses on her. Her fingers move slowly, almost against her will, and for the first time in centuries, she pauses before giving the order. Thyra, quietly, to herself. What if this could be different? She turns to face her command officers, who stand rigid, their eyes locked on her every move, waiting for the inevitable orders. The tension in the air is palpable, but there's a flicker of uncertainty in their expressions. They too feel the change like a ripple beneath the surface of the vast, unyielding power they have come to know. They wait for her, expecting the familiar response, an order to crush the rebellion, to show the galaxy that defiance leads only to ruin. But instead, Thyra's voice breaks the silence, cold and deliberate, though there is a trace of something new in it, something softer, quieter. Thyra. Hold position. The words are simple, but the effect is immediate. The officers exchange confused glances, unsure of what they've just heard. The silence stretches between them, thick with disbelief. It is unheard of for Thyra to give such an order. She, the Supreme Warlord, who had built her empire on fear and destruction, had just commanded restraint, waiting. No orders to strike. No immediate retaliation. Just silence. The ship's commanders looked to one another, but none dare question her. Thyra stands still, her back to them, gazing once again at the screen displaying the rebellion's coordinates. Her eyes narrow, and for a moment, she almost sees the rebellion not as an enemy, but as something different. A challenge, yes, but also an opportunity? The thought takes her by surprise, unsettling her further. Outside the vast windows of the Doombringer, the stars seem to shimmer just a little brighter, as if the very universe is watching her, waiting for her to make a decision. She closes her eyes, as if trying to shut out the weight of it all. Kael's voice echoes in her mind, uninvited and persistent. Fear is just a tool. It doesn't last. It only controls as long as you let it. His words have taken root in her thoughts, and now, for the first time, she questions the very foundation of her rule. Her empire has been built on the idea that fear is the most powerful weapon. It has held together her dominion, a vast network of worlds, and kept the galaxy in line. But Kael had made her see the cracks in this foundation, the way fear bends, the way it breaks, the way it leaves its victims hollow. He had made her question whether control through fear could ever be enough. Could it ever be sustained? Thyra, softly, almost to herself. What if there's another way? Her hand hovers over the command console, fingers poised over the keys that could unleash devastation upon the rebels. The impulse is there, familiar, the urge to crush the rebellion before it grows. But something holds her back. A new awareness stirs within her, a growing realization that her old ways might not be the answer anymore. The room is quiet, and for a brief moment, it feels as if the entire ship is holding its breath, waiting for her to make the next move. Her empire, built on the foundations of terror and submission, begins to feel fragile. The cracks she's been avoiding for so long are now impossible to ignore. Thyra, firmly, but with a touch of uncertainty. Hold position. Do not engage. Await further instructions. There it is. The decision. Not to destroy, not to crush, but to wait. To withhold power for the first time in her reign, to choose silence instead of fear. It is a small change, but in that silence, something begins to shift. The officers exchange uncertain looks, but none question her. The command is absolute, even though it defies the very essence of everything Thyra has taught them. For the first time, they see her differently, not as a ruler who controls with an iron fist, but as something more uncertain, human, and vulnerable. Thyra steps back from the console, her eyes still locked on the map of the galaxy. The rebellion in the Terra Seas sector continues to pulse on the screen, but now, it is no longer just a threat. It is a symbol of change, of something new. She doesn't know what the future holds. She doesn't know whether this decision will lead to the downfall of her empire or the beginning of something greater. But she feels it, Deep within her, this is the moment where everything can change. For the first time, Thyra has paused, and in that pause, a seed of doubt has taken root in her heart, one that could reshape not just her empire, but the entire galaxy. And as the Doombringer hangs in the cold expanse of space, waiting, the future remains uncertain, but for the first time, Thyra no longer feels the crushing weight of her own certainty. The Doombringer drifts silently through the cold expanse of space, its once mighty presence now a symbol of uncertainty. Thyra, standing at the helm, faces a future she never anticipated. The rebellion in the Terra Seas sector, once a spark of defiance, has become something far more significant. For the first time, she is forced to confront her own doubts, questioning everything she once believed about power, fear, and control. Kael Mercer, the human who mocked her empire, has ignited a change that ripples through her mind and her fleet. No longer is she certain that fear is the greatest tool to command the galaxy. The silence she chose over destruction is a decision that has shifted the course of her reign. The balance of power is no longer defined by the destruction she once wielded so easily. The galaxy watches as Thyra stands at the crossroads of her future. Will she choose to continue her reign of terror, or will she embrace this new path of uncertainty and change? The rebellion is no longer just an act of defiance, it's a reflection of a larger transformation, one that could reshape everything. The empire that once seemed unshakable is now on the edge of something entirely different. A revolution has begun, but it is not one of war. It is one of thought, of power, and of the very nature of leadership. What comes next will determine not just the fate of Thyra, but the future of the entire galaxy. What do you think, viewers? Is this the end of an era of fear, or the beginning of something even greater? Can Thyra lead in a new way, or will the old ways continue to dominate? Leave your thoughts and predictions in the comments below. The fate of the galaxy is uncertain, and we want to know where you think it's headed next. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an adventure at Galactic Conundrums.